Hey, what's good, y'all? This is Big E, and you're listening to the Liberty Cast. Today, we're going to talk about free speech and how it's under attack. The Second Amendment also under, in fact, the entire Constitution is under attack, but you all knew that. Robert Francis goes full communist tyrant with his plans to take your commonly owned sporting rifles. The left goes absolutely apoplectic over another one of the president's tweets. And a Texas pediatrician tries to force her son to act like a girl and has plans to give him puberty blockers when he turns 8. And Mark Zuckerberg goes to Capitol Hill and gets grilled, and galactic stupidity ensues. We'll talk about all that and more if we can get to it on this week's edition of the Liberty Cast. So this week, the Campaign for Free Speech released a poll where they found that 51% of Americans think that the First Amendment goes too far in allowing free hate speech and should be updated to reflect today's quote-unquote cultural norms. This poll also found that 48% of Americans believe that hate speech should be against the law. 54% of respondents to this poll said that a consequence for hate speech should be possible jail time. And 57% of the respondents said that government should be able to take action against newspapers and TV stations that publish content that is biased, inflammatory, or false. So, according to this survey, everybody should be half of America should be on board with the FBI walking into CNN headquarters and slapping the bracelets on everyone in that newsroom. But of course, that's not going to happen. But my question is, and my question when this comes up is always, what is hate speech? Who defines it? How do you define it? I mean, can you imagine the outcry if someone overhears a group of guys at a bar giving each other the business the way we do when a few adult beverages are involved? It can be brutally offensive. Is it hate speech? Should the bartender call the cops and have us hauled off to jail because we were giving each other a hard time in a admittedly brutal and offensive way sometimes? It was just 2 years ago, in fact, October of 2017, where Salon put out an article talking about the First Amendment on college campuses. And this article claimed that the suppression of free speech on campuses, especially among conservatives, is a manufactured phenomenon. This article also made the claim that the study by the Brookings Institute, where they cited 20% of surveyed college students believed that it was appropriate to use violence to shut down hate speech or offensive speech. They claim that it was funded by a right-wing ideologue. Well, those right-wing ideologues that they claim funded this study were the Koch brothers. Sadly, one of the Koch brothers passed away recently, but they are not right-wingers, never have been. They support a lot of Republicans, but they have been known to fund and support Democrats as well. These guys were libertarians. And based on some of the things that have gone on since President Trump took office, I would say that they're Democrats as far as I'm concerned, and may have some libertarian streak in them that sometimes makes them appear to hardcore leftists as being conservative and right wing, but they're not by any stretch are they super conservative or right wingers, not by any stretch. But Salon tries to make this claim that this is a manufactured phenomenon, but the existence of Speech codes on college campuses belie that. But speech codes started to take off in the 80s when we saw an increase in representation on college campuses of women, minorities, and openly gay people. And in May of 1991, President George H.W. Bush, Bush 1, warned of, quote, free speech under assault throughout the United States, including on some college campuses. So for Salon to try to make this claim that it was a figment of conservatives' imagination and a made-up phenomenon is just patently absurd. And even without the evidence that I just presented to you, just think about it for a second. Democrat professors outnumber Republican professors on campus by a margin of 10-1. 73% of conservative college students hold back their political views because they feel like they'll be retaliated against. They feel like they won't get the grades they deserve with a leftist professor. College is supposed to be the place where you go to get your beliefs challenged, where you either hone your skills in defending your points of view, or you're persuaded with evidence to have your views changed. And college professors are supposed to guide that, not indoctrinate their students with their particular worldview. And when the ratio is 10-1, and in some surveys you might even find it say 12-1, with a ratio like that, college campuses don't become a place where you can freely exchange ideas, where you can have your beliefs challenged. It becomes an echo chamber. It becomes a place where views are not challenged, they're reinforced. Well, conservative views are challenged, of course, but the conservative students don't have a chance or don't have much of a chance to really engage and develop the skills to be able to defend their positions, whatever they might be. Now, I suppose we can debate whether or not free speech on campus is actually under attack. I think it's pretty obvious that it is. But consider this. Massachusetts right now is considering a bill to make calling someone a bitch, forgive my language, illegal. Think about that for a second. Obviously, it's not a nice word. It's not nice to call somebody that name. But a $150 fine for the first offense, and for a second offense, $200 and possible jail time? Come on. And in Connecticut, 2 men were arrested for being caught on camera using the N-word. Now, I've seen the video. They weren't directing it at anyone that I could see in the frame. They were just being college kids, being stupid, yelling out offensive words. Should they have done it? Obviously not. Does it rise to the level of an arrestable offense? Of course not. But the statute used to charge these men states that any person who, by his advertisement, ridicules or holds up to contempt any person or class of persons on account of the creed, religion, color, denomination, nationality, or race of such person or class of persons shall be guilty of a Class D misdemeanor. And this actually happened on the campus of the University of Connecticut. Do we need any more validation that free speech on college campuses is under attack? Now, again, should they have said this? Of course not. But does the First Amendment apply? Of course it does. The First Amendment is meant to protect offensive speech. And what's the remedy for offensive speech? It's not arresting somebody. It's not making what they say illegal. It's more speech. Leftists like to call conservatives Nazis and fascists. Well, this suppression of free speech is actual fascism. One last quick thing before we move on, and I've already spent more time on this than I wanted to, but there was a Major League umpire who is not working the World Series, by the way, go Nationals. I know that's sacrilege here in Texas, but first of all, the Houston Astros shouldn't even be in the World Series against the Nationals. And that's a topic for another day. But I've been a Nationals fan. I've been a fan of all the Washington teams over the years. So I'm just keeping it real. But anyway, MLB umpire Rob Drake tweeted on Tuesday that he plans to buy an AR-15 because, quote, "If you impeach my president this way, you will have another civil war, MAGA 2020. He deleted that tweet pretty quickly, but there was another one earlier in the evening where he said, quote, "You can't do an impeachment inquiry from the basement of Capitol Hill without even a vote. What is going on in this country?" Now, you might be asking yourself right now, why am I bringing this up? Well, MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred is investigating this tweet. Why? There was no threat. He didn't threaten anyone. So this is just ridiculous. But this is just another example of how free speech, and not just on college campuses, obviously, is under attack. Now, I don't believe there's going to be a civil war. I think we're already in a cold ideological war with the left right now, and I think that will go on, and I think that will get worse. I do not think there's going to be a hot war, a hot civil war. I just don't see that happening. But he did say he was going to buy a gun in that tweet, so maybe there's some anti-Second Amendment gun control angle that I'm not seeing. And I'm going to assume that since he's gainfully employed as a Major League Baseball umpire, and he tweeted that he was going to go buy one, that he could do it legally, whereas most criminals do not. And we will talk about that on the other side of this quick break. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, before the break, we talked about Rob Drake, who was likely going to be buying his AR-15 legally in the absence of evidence that he's a criminal. I'm going to assume that. But criminals don't care about your gun laws. Gun control measures, gun laws have no effect on criminals whatsoever. And in case you needed some proof of this, consider this case in Boston. Two men claiming to be members of the Latin Kings are facing significant jail time for traveling from Boston to Vermont to trade cocaine for firearms. Firearms that they said were intended for use in a war in Boston. Court documents say that between November of 2017 and March of 2018, the two men traveled between Boston and Vermont, where they would give local Vermonters money to make straw purchases from legitimate gun dealers, and then they would give the guns to these two scumbags, and the scumbags would give the people drugs. Now, there's a plea deal on the table, but if they were to get the full boat, they would be facing life in prison for the drugs and 20 years on the gun charges. And 5 Vermonters were charged by the feds with making straw purchases of about 30 guns. Now, these guns are out there. We don't have any information yet as to what types of guns they were, whether or not they were AR-15s, pistols, what have you. We don't have that information yet. But just for the sake of argument, let's say that one of those was an AR-15. And let's just say that one of those got into the hands of someone who committed a mass shooting. Keep in mind that Massachusetts has some of the most strict gun laws in the country. Yet somehow these gangbangers figured out a way to get around them, as criminals always do. But what law being proposed by Robert Francis or any of the other leftists in the disarmament primary, which one of their proposed laws would stop the potential mass shooting? I'll give you a hint. Precisely zero. What these scumbags did is probably something that's happening all across the criminal underworld around this country. These are not loopholes to be closed. These are felonies. These are criminal acts. Now juxtapose that with Michael Bloomberg's Everytown for Guns safety outfit pushing this proposal to use red flag laws to keep guns out of the hands of veterans, ostensibly to prevent suicide. Now, if you're a regular listener to this show, you know my position on red flag laws, and you also know, whether you agree with it or not, that it completely circumvents due process. But they're claiming that they're pushing this to help prevent suicide, veteran suicide, which is an admirable goal. But if that's really the objective here, do you really think having the cops show up at their door with a court order to take their guns away is going to help that situation? Do you really think that's the best way to go about helping a veteran who's in crisis? Helping anyone who's in crisis, whether they were a veteran or not. But if they own guns, do you really think that is the best tack to take? Now, suicide is a huge problem among vets, other groups, the country as a whole. In fact, between 1999 and 2017, according to the CDC, the national suicide rate has increased 33%. And right now, it's at its highest point in 50 years. As an aside, though, the 22 veterans a day committing suicide, that statistic is a myth. It's a myth born out of bad and out of context data. Now, that is not to minimize it in any way. I'm a veteran myself, and it saddens me to think about my brothers and sisters who feel like that is the only way out. So it is still a problem, and we can talk about the actual statistics at another time. But I just wanted to point that out while it was on my mind. But this is not a firearm problem. It is a mental health problem. Now, Everytown and the other leftists will point to Connecticut's suicide rate falling after they instituted their red flag laws in 1999. There's just one problem with that, though. The overall suicide rate since 1999, as you probably can guess from what we just talked about, has gone up 20% since then. Even though the rate of firearm suicide in that time frame went down by 14%. So again, it's not a gun problem, because the people who feel like they have to end it for themselves will find a way to do it. The left really just wants to take your guns away. And the thing is, it wasn't 5 minutes ago when the mantra of every leftist, when they were talking about gun control, was nobody wants to take your guns away. And now it is their rally cry. So they're attempting to backdoor this, and they want to strip veterans of their Second Amendment rights under the guise of helping. But I don't think they really care about vets, because if they did, they would address the actual issue of suicide rather than backdoor gun control laws to fix a mental health issue. And of course, the poster boy for gun confiscation is none other than our good friend.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15.
Now, I know Robert Francis has no shot, but I bring him up a lot because his policy proposals are not unique. The rest of the candidates in the disarmament primary are right in line with him. They probably wish he was not as vocal, as honest about what he really wants to do with respect to gun control. because they know that his views are way out there. And it makes it that much tougher for them to be able to convince people that they'll still be able to hang on to their firearms when anyone paying attention knows that if they get in power, the Second Amendment is in total jeopardy. So because his proposals are in line with the rest of the leftists, he's just being more honest about it. His proposals could very well get enacted should any Democrat win.
I think a mandatory buyback can be financed with a surcharge that would be paid by gun manufacturers, those who are making the AR-15s and AK-47s, and continue to sell them into our communities despite the terror that they've inspired and the lives that they've been taken. I think this is the right way to fund a mandatory buyback without imposing any new taxes on our fellow Americans.
Now, that cut I just played you of Robert Francis proposing that gun manufacturers pay a surcharge to finance the compensated confiscation program that he's proposing could very well have been and was in the running to be in this week's Galactically Stupid segment. But it aligned better with what we're talking about right now. So I have something else for you on that. But let's talk about this compensated confiscation program. It's estimated that between 5 and 10 million AR-15s are owned by civilians in this country. That means that if the government tries to, quote unquote, buy back, not that you can buy back anything you never owned in the first place, but if they, quote unquote, try to buy back each one of these AR-15s, at 1,000 a pop, that's $5 to $10 billion. And let me just tell you that 1,000 is very low. That is the definite low end. I mean, you can buy an AR-15 for $500, $600, $700, but then you're talking about accessories, optics, magazines, customizations that people do. Now you're talking $1,500, $2,000, $3,000. They're not going to pay you fair market value for something like that. You know that, and I know that. Now, those estimates are from the 5 to 10 million AR-15s that have been purchased. What about the ones that were built from 80% lowers? How are they going to confiscate those? And if they do somehow figure out who has those guns that they built themselves, how much are they going to pay? Because you're talking about buying that 80% lower, either milling it out yourself or getting it milled. I mean, by the time you buy all the parts to build one of these yourself, you're easily talking $2,000, $3,000. Now, the good thing is there are no serial numbers. The likelihood of them finding out, unless you post something on Facebook, the likelihood of them finding out is going to be is pretty slim. But if you happen to piss off a leftist who happens to know that you own one of these, they're going to call whoever, and you'll have a visit from law enforcement at your house, which Robert Francis also said would happen. I mean, I could go on and on and on about all the different possibilities and scenarios about how this could go down. And it's scary. It's scary that these people are so willing to trample all over your rights as an American. All right, y'all, we're going to take another quick break. And when we get back, we're going to talk about another meltdown by the left over language. So President Trump is on the Twitter and he's making people upset yet again. And this time he tweeted a complaint about all of the harassment that he's dealt with over the past 4 years, the impeachment, all this nonsense. And he tweeted this, quote, "So someday, if a Democrat becomes president and the Republicans win the House, even by a tiny margin, they can impeach the president without due process or fairness or any legal rights. All Republicans must remember what they are witnessing here, a lynching, but we will win." So what was wrong with that tweet, you ask? Well, a lot, apparently, because the president used the word lynching to describe what has been happening over the past 4 years. They decided that that was racially insensitive. Now, I said on social media, people were asking me, and I was seeing it asked on different forums and groups and stuff like that, if this was a big deal. And I said on social media that probably wasn't the best choice of words to use in that tweet, but so what? He's not wrong in his characterization. But among the left's many other failings, they seem to have a really short memory.
How dare the president compare lynching to impeachment? Does he not know the history of lynching in this country? Does he not know that thousands of African Americans were lynched? How dare the president compare a lawful constitutional process to mob violence and lynching?
This day feels to me like we're taking a step down the road to becoming a political lynch mob.
Even if the president should be impeached, history is going to question whether or not this was just a partisan lynching or whether or not it was something that, in fact, met the standard, the very high bar that was set by the founders as to what constituted an impeachable offense.
So I will not vote for this nightmare before Christmas. I will not vote for this lynching in the people's house.
What we are doing or what we are doing here is not a prosecution, it's a persecution. And indeed, it is a political lynching.
Uh-oh. What was that? What was that? Now, not only does the left have an obviously and conveniently short memory, but they seem to have either forgotten the history of lynching or never knew it. Now, yes, over the entire period where lynchings took place, a lot of black people were lynched. 73% of the victims of lynchings between 1882 and 1968 were black. The highest number of lynchings that took place in that time frame was 1892, and there were 230 lynchings. Out of that, 161 were black. The largest single lynching incident took place in New Orleans, Louisiana on March 14th, 1891, where 11 men were lynched. But they weren't African Americans. They weren't black men. They were Italians. And there's I'm not going to get into the whole history of what went down that day right now, but feel free to look it up yourself. But I say that just to illustrate the fact that lynching, while it was predominantly committed against black people, it wasn't exclusively committed against black people. So to say that the president is insensitive or racist for using this term is just silly, ridiculous, and lacking in any perspective or sense of history, which, frankly, is the left's stock in trade when it comes to this kind of thing. All right, moving on. We're going to go ahead and plow through a couple of quick stories and then get you out of here with this week's really stupid segment. Now, I can't believe this is actually going on here in Texas, but a 6-year-old by the name of James Younger is being forced by his mother to dress as a girl, live as a girl. And when he turns 8, this woman plans to give him puberty blockers. Now, I said on social media, I wrote about this. This is abuse. This is absolutely child abuse. And a Texas jury actually ruled that the boy's father could not legally prevent his mother from giving him puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones in order to chemically castrate him. Mind you, this is not coming from any sort of gender confusion from the boy. The boy, when he's with his father, is adamant that he does not want to wear dresses, that he does not want to be a girl, that he does not want to be called Luna, as the mother is trying to change his name to. I mean, it's sick and it's heartbreaking. But thankfully, justice prevailed and the judge overseeing the case overruled the jury. If you haven't been following the story, I encourage you to take a look at it and read up on what's been going on, because it's like I said, it's heartbreaking that this mother is withholding affection from her son if he doesn't act like a girl. I mean, it's just sick. It's almost like a Munchausen's by proxy type of situation. I know it's not quite the same thing, but I don't know. It's like I said, it's just sick. And the left always likes to accuse the right, conservatives, of being anti-science. Yet here we are fighting over the fact that there are only two genders, but it's the left that is trying to force all these other, ever how many genders they decided to come up with on society. And it's just ridiculous. Now, science tells us that there are only two genders, and science also tells us that life begins at fertilization. A man by the name of Steve Jacobs, who is a PhD graduate from the University of Chicago, for his dissertation, he tried to come to some sort of understanding of the factual and legal aspects of both sides of the abortion debate. And in his research, he found that 93% of the people he surveyed agreed that human life should be protected once it begins, and that 80% of those people believe that biologists were the most qualified to answer the question of when life begins. So he created a survey, sent it to the biology departments of over 1,000 academic institutes around the world. And the results of that survey found that 96% of the biologists who answered that survey said that a human's life begins at fertilization. And here's the kicker. 89% of the people who responded identified as liberal, 85% pro-choice, and 63% non-religious. And of the Americans who responded to the survey, 92% identified as Democrat. So even leftist scientists agree that life begins at conception. Sounds like settled science to me. All right, we're going to hit one last quick story before we get you out of here. We've been hearing a lot in the news lately about this Latin phrase, quid pro quo. The president, his staff has insisted that when it came to this Ukraine phone call, there was no quid pro quo. I read the transcript. I didn't see any. Mick Mulvaney came out and he seemed to admit to some quid pro quo. So what? So what? Our diplomacy is pretty much based on quid pro quo. We give foreign aid to different countries. We do things because, first of all, we're not giving stuff away as much as it may seem like we do, and we probably give too much away. But when we do, we expect something in return. Quid pro quo. So it's not like there's anything wrong with the concept of quid pro quo. It just depends on what you're asking for in exchange for whatever you're going to give the other party. So the left is claiming that President Trump tried to get the Ukrainian president to investigate Joe Biden and Hunter Biden in exchange for military assistance. Turns out that military assistance was withheld and conditioned on some things. but they never told the Ukrainians. So if you never tell the other party that they have to do something, or that you're not going to do something for them until they do something for you, if that is never communicated, there is no quid pro quo. So now that we've established that there was no quid pro quo, and we've established that there's nothing inherently wrong with quid pro quo, let's listen to what an Obama staffer had to say about diplomacy and quid pro quo.
There's a very dangerous combination, argument being made, I should say, by people like Mulvaney that their quid pro quo is a normal part of diplomacy, and suggesting that looking for political dirt on your opponent, like Joe Biden or anyone else, and doing that through diplomacy is normal. It is not normal. I worked in the State Department. I have the pleasure of knowing people who have spent decades in diplomacy and working in government. That is not how it works. How it works, you do use levers like things like, if you do more work on human rights and you are better on that, then we may unleash some more military assistance for you. That is in the national interest of the United States.
So she says that quid pro quo is not a normal part of diplomacy. And then she goes on to describe quid pro quo. Now, she tried to make a distinction between what was appropriate to ask for in that type of negotiation and what is not. But it gets lost in the fact that she's admitting that quid pro quo is actually a part of diplomacy. Watching the left go through their mental gymnastics would be amusing if it wasn't so flippin' dangerous. All right, y'all, it's time. Let's get you out of here with this week's episode of The Adventures of the Galactically Stupid. So this week, Mark Zuckerberg was up on Capitol Hill testifying before Congress regarding Facebook's Libra cryptocurrency initiative that is they're about to undertake. And he faced all kinds of ridiculous questions, but this week we have a twofer. We have one rookie and one veteran who is very well known to this segment of the show. First up, we have Representative Al Green.
Sir, is it true that the Libra Association oversees the Libra project?
Congressman, yes.
And is it true that global corporations make up the association?
Congressman, the association is made of, today, 21 companies and nonprofit organizations as well.
Of the 21, how many are headed by women?
Congressman, I do not know the answer to that off the top of my head, but I can get it for you.
Well, I believe you can get it, Mr. Zuckerberg, but one would assume that you would know who heads these corporations that are going to be running this global company.
Wow, there was more than that, but it was just too painful to keep listening to. And dude needs to crack a thesaurus. I'm sure you can all guess who this next one is. It's, of course, the reigning, defending world heavyweight champion of stupid, Alexandria Occasional Cortex.
Do you see a potential problem here with a complete lack of fact-checking on political advertisements?
Well, Congresswoman, I think lying is bad, and I think if you were to run an ad that had a lie, that would be bad. That's different from it being, in our position, the right thing to do to prevent your constituents or people in an election from seeing that you had lied.
In your ongoing dinner parties with far-right figures, some of who advance the conspiracy theory that white supremacy is a hoax, did you discuss so-called social media bias against conservatives, and do you believe there is a bias?
Congresswoman, So I don't remember everything that was in the question.
That's all right. I'll move on. Can you explain why you've named the Daily Caller, a publication well documented with ties to white supremacists, as an official fact checker for Facebook?
Congresswoman, sure. We actually don't appoint the independent fact checkers. They go through an independent organization that has a rigorous standard for who they allow to serve as a fact checker.
So you would say that white supremacist tied publications meet a rigorous standard for fact checking?
Congresswoman, I would say that we're not the one assessing that standard. The International Fact Checking Network is the one who is setting that standard.
Wow. Now, I don't believe for 1 second that Zuckerberg is not biased, that Facebook is not biased. I don't believe that for a second. He answered the question as well as anyone could have expected him to. But he's just as much of a lefty as the rest of them. So yes, there is absolutely a bias against conservatives on social media, especially Facebook. And where in the world is she getting this idea that the Daily Caller has ties to white supremacy? There is absolutely no evidence to suggest that. Her saying that was the first time I'd ever even heard of such a thing. These people are ridiculous. But anyway, folks, that's our show. I want to thank you all for listening. You can find us on Spreaker, Spotify, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, iTunes, anywhere you get your podcast from, you can find us. Please subscribe, leave a review, let us know what you think. You can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Parlay. It's at The Liberty Cast on all 4 platforms. And you can check us out on the website, thelibertycast.net. Go to the podcast page. You'll find all the podcasts there and links to a lot of the stories that I talk about and some that I think you just might find interesting and may not even really mention in the show. But again, thank you all for listening. And until next time, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.